Welcome to Mindfulness Manufacturing. My name is Trevor Blondeel. Spending 25 years in manufacturing, I discovered the real impact we have on turnover, communication, and the ability to manage change is how we show up. That's the essence of emotional intelligence. In each episode, we bring a guest or message to expand your skills, engage your people, and grow your organization. So let's jump in. Recently, the old age question of managing versus leading has been coming up. And I look back on some of the episodes over the past few years, and we really haven't gone deep into that topic. And it isn't that people are asking that question. It is more around, hey, I'm trying to get this result in my role. I'm progressing through the organization. I have this situation, and then that conversation comes up. And now I have Dr. Andy Neillie, who has a doctorate in leadership and personal ethics, a best-selling book, and lots of stories as a business owner. So Andy, where are your insights on this topic?
Well, Trevor, you're exactly right. Everybody wants to be a leader and thinks they're a leader. The only reason you're on LinkedIn is because you're a business leader. And we talk about leadership development from second grade on, I think. But, in the manufacturing space, in the trade space, in frontline workers, it's about results. And so when I work in those spaces, people just want to know, how do I get my team to perform? How do we make our marks? How do we get product out the door? How do I fulfill my obligations? And that's where leadership ends up playing a very important role. You and I have talked about this some in the past. And so that's what I'm looking forward to diving into with you today.
And the reason that it's really come up is this concept of, hey, I'm really busy. I love that general word. I always like to say that no one ever says that I don't have anything going on. And it's just that intention of how we spend the time. And when we talk about this whole, hey, I'm in a leadership position and I want to progress, but I just don't have time to give that feedback to everybody. And all that positive reinforcement, people already know that, right? But really, if you take it back to that, like, what drives our behavior? What is the core qualities that you see, Dr. Andy, in the makeup of the people that you've worked with over your 30 plus years in this space?
Probably the way you and I would answer that question today is different than it would have even been pre-COVID, because the old model of because I said so actually still has some legs to it, and it had a much broader application, I think, 4 years ago. But the work from home, Great Resignation wave that has impacted intellectual workers, right? The guy that wants to sit on his laptop at a coffee shop 8 hours a day and write code. But the mentality of that has impacted the folks that you and I deal with as well, where the need for flexibility, the need for understanding, the need for managers to lead their people. If you and I can define management as the doing and leadership as the being, our workers need both more today from the people that they report to than probably ever before. As you know, my wife and I own a number of retail establishments. Well, the hours of the retail shop are 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. I can't have people working from home. They've got to be there. But the challenge of meeting them where they're at and leading them so that they're on board and they're bringing their A game. I think that challenge is as great in 2022 as it has ever been.
Yeah, with manufacturing, we don't make a lot from home either.
No, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. I was with a light manufacturer yesterday, and their parking lot is full. The last couple of times I've worked with them, they were trying to figure out split shifts and partial shifts, and they were having supply chain issues. And so they were finding work for some of their people, and now they're back. And you're right. We can't be sitting at a coffee shop. We got to be in the welding shop instead.
Like I talk about the evolution of even leadership. And I don't even think it changes much from the beginning of time, but based on the environment, we get driven to get better. Sometimes we can get lazy, right? The laziness of just, hey, like you said, this is what you need to do. And when we start, and all these buzzwords of quiet quitting and all these other terminologies,
Right.
it really comes back to the name of the podcast of mindfulness, right? Are you mindful? Are you aware of the fact that if you want to progress your organization, your group, and even your own leadership, it's not about you. It is about being mindful of, hey, when I came in today, I have a list and all this noise of work that needs to get done and goals that needs to get accomplished. And I was definitely one of the sinners in this area of just being the taskmaster.
Yeah.
And to keep focused on others, what are those principles? What would you look at as far as what are the basic fundamentals that we need as leaders?
Well, first of all, you called yourself a taskmaster. I thought you were a Canadian. You're all so nice north of the border. You weren't a taskmaster, I suspect. And I want to echo something you said, where it's some of these principles are timeless. I've kidded people for years. There's really nothing new in leadership. Marcus Aurelius and Jesus Christ. Once you get past the two of them, there's really nothing new. And so you're right. There is a timelessness to it, but there is an application, I think, today. There's so much confusion out there. And Trevor, part of the challenge that your audience and my audience has to address is, the staffing issues. Why would somebody want to work for me? I remember my very first boss, I was working on a construction crew and we were going from job site to job site. And my boss was driving the heavily laden, F-350 pickup truck with all of our gear in the back. And I was in the passenger seat. He had a bit of a temper. I am pulling the paperwork together from one job site and stapling all of that so we could turn it into the office while we're driving. Something bad happened. All I know is he picked up the stapler that I just used, opened it up, and whacked my thigh 4 times with the stapler, driving staples into the top of my leg. Well, I didn't have any insight around the stuff you and I think about all the time. I just knew that Jerry was not just a bad boss. At some level, he was a bad person, right? And I think part of that began my hunger to see what makes a good leader. Unfortunately, some of the best mentors you and I have at times are the anti-mentors, the lessons we learn, man, I don't want to be like him, or I don't want to be like her. And, I've had the Daves and the Jerrys and the Rays and others in my life over the years that I just said, boy, there's some lessons there that I see what happens. I was working with a technology client years ago, and the manager was in the back of the room of a training workshop that I was doing on coaching. You talked about how do I have time to coach my people? And this was a coaching workshop. And something came out about a bad habit of this manager in the back of the room. And Trevor, within about 3 minutes, the whispers had taken place, and the 18 people that were on his team, man, I will tell you, I saw that morning him lose the ability to lead them because they all found out what he was doing. So it really leads me to one of my tenets, and we're going to talk about, the framework for leadership that, I've seen in the firms that I've worked with and the leaders I've interviewed and the dissertation studies I did. But the 4 leadership necessities that people need to get if they're going to move from just being a manager of doing to a leader of being. You got to be a person of strategy and vision and passion. Conviction is what I call it, a person that's got their eyes up. You've got to be a person that can get your team to execute, to get stuff done. I call it competence. And then that third one, and the one that, Jerry probably anti-demonstrated for me so many years ago, you got to be a good person, a person of character, fair, honest, balanced. You can't let your anger come out against the team. You've got to be a person of character. And then the last one, you and I chatted about it recently, as I just looked at good managers who were really also leading well. Trevor, they had a relationship, and I've got my C's. I've got conviction, competence, and character. So I was looking for a C word to flesh out this framework. And I realized actually there is a word. It's an old-fashioned word, but it's the word covenant. And quick illustration, and I'll turn it back to you. I live in Texas. In Texas, if somebody's going to get married, obviously there's a personal relationship, love and affection, and commitment to live together and love together. And there's a personal side. But at least here in the state of Texas, and I suspect it's in most states, there's also a contract. there's a marriage license that gets signed and turned in and recorded in the state archives. And so this intimate relationship is also a relationship that has structure or commitment around it. And when I looked at the best bosses that I was evaluating as I was pulling my thinking together on this, I realized, you know what, they have a structure to their organization. There are job requirements, there are expectations. There's also a care for their people, this stewardship, this servant leadership that is 2,000 years old at this point. Covenant is an old-fashioned word, but you and I probably ought to lead the charge to bring that language back to the marketplace. So I know you and I've talked about these 4 leadership necessities, and we wanted to go a little bit deeper. I've talked quite a bit. Where are we at?
We're at real stories, and I'll ask you for some advice here. If I'm working with this leader and they have one of their professionals that is struggling, and their mindset's now, well, I don't think this person's really going to make it. I don't even know if they're competent enough for the role. So I'm like, oh, what does that mean? What would be your advice to that person if that's some of their mindset? Because I'm thinking of covenant and the fact of, man, you've got a commitment here for your focus and energy, but what if your mindset starts slipping that way?
Well, that's always a challenge. In my experience, one of the defining characteristics of a person who is becoming a leader and not just a manager is they lean into those types of situations. And it sounds like just fundamental basics, Trevor, but I am amazed at how many managers shun the hard conversations. They show up for an annual review and their employee is totally surprised that they have been missing the mark because their boss wasn't having the hard conversations with them along the way. To the person that you're coaching, the first question I'd ask is, does your team member know where you think they're at? I see 2 extremes in managers. They either fly off in a rage and they're angry all the time, and people recoil every time they walk into the shop and they see their bosses there, or they have no clue what their boss thinks about them. And then they get to the annual review and they thought they were, meeting and exceeding expectations on everything. And all of a sudden they're getting check boxes on the 1s or the 2s, does not meet expectation. So my first piece of advice would be to challenge him or her. Are you having those hard conversations with your team member to help them see they're not, cutting it? I will tell you, in my experience, 70% of the time, that's the issue, is you're sitting back in your office with pen and notepad getting frustrated. They're out on the plant floor and they don't really have any clue. The other 30% of the time, there are some people that just aren't in the right job. And probably part of the job of a good leader is, do we have a place this person fits? And then, Trevor, you and I both worked enough. At times, you just need to move on. And are you brave enough as a manager to be the leader and tell somebody you're not part of our team anymore? You have a stewardship responsibility at that point to take care of your bottom line and your production quotas.
Stewardship, covenant, those are some words I'm not using all the time that you can definitely bring back. So in this context, we did have the conversation, and it's interesting that some of the higher levels of the organization are putting some pressure on this leader to say, oh, you got to do something, to this person. And I've seen it in the past where it's like, oh, you did a formal discipline. Okay, now we're creating some action. Well, has nothing to do with stewardship. That's just like, hey, I know if there's a document that's signed, we're getting somewhere. So we talked about some of that level of just having that conversation of just, what's going on? Like, what's going on right here? We have some errors, where there's some pressures on our department. So started down that path. And the deeper level conversation too is the fact of, if you've truly written this person off, like you said, you've got to move on and make that decision. Because what I was thinking about is, once you've decided that person is no longer competent in that role, you've lost that title of leadership. You're not their leader anymore. You may be their director, their supervisor, their dictator, but you are no longer in a position to lead them and further their career if you cannot get your mindset back. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I would agree. And I would say if that's the case, either you need to grow or they need to go. I mean, that's again, I come back to 70% of the time, my problem is with the manager and not with the team member. If the manager had that mindset where I am gonna, work with my HR department to follow the procedures the right way, but I'm also going to try to lead this person to grow. At the end of the day, it's the leader's responsibility to build the team. One other thing though, at times, part of a leader's responsibility is really to champion and protect their team from other people. And so, managing up is one of the challenges. And again, you and I have both seen it on the plant floor where, everybody grouses about the guys up in the office, back there. And the shop manager needs to represent his team to them well. I mean, it's very complicated, but the point is leaders have got to lean in. One other thing I'll say about these words you and I are talking about, stewardship and covenant. I'm on LinkedIn a lot, and I swear 3 or 4 times a week, I see a LinkedIn article about, my company is my family. And I just call time out to that. You can have love inside a company if you and I define love as an action word, where I'm going to do the right thing on behalf of that team member. And so in some respects, the love and affection answer, I don't have any problem with. But in the workplace, we're not a family, we're a team. We're a team that's competing against our competitors. Most often teams I work with, we're really competing against ourselves and our performance last month or last quarter or last year. And so I'm very comfortable calling a work environment a team because we're competing toward a goal. The problem I have in today's environment at times is everybody's saying, well, I just want to work for a happy family. Businesses aren't families. Families don't necessarily have production goals. They are inward facing to themselves. Businesses need to be outward facing. And, if this person isn't performing, Trevor, part of what you and I've got to counsel the managers we counsel in is work with your HR department to do the right thing. If you need to champion this team player to your management team and fight for them. But the goal is to win the game. The goal is not to have everybody feel good about themselves.
It is a bit of a game, right? And the fact of we do have competitors and profits count, results matter, but we can do both in having these conversations. I've had that situation where we had a supervisor that was messing up everyone's time. Actually, was at this point in time, he was a team leader, but he was messing up the overtime. And then the next week it was the scheduling of pay and these different issues. There's a lot of noise. The person really wanted to succeed. At the end of the day, he became and still is one of the great supervisors. And I like what you said around the process, because all of a sudden this person has not been has been talked to, but never really formally sat down. I'm a big fan of coaching and documenting coaching and just saying, hey, Andy, we've been struggling a little bit this week. We're just going to document this now. And if you've had the discipline, and this is where I think that comes back to the stewardship and the discipline of, say, well, I've told them they're doing a good job. And then say, okay, so you're going to write down that they're not doing a good job. So how many times have you written down that they're doing a good job? And I do a book report every month. And this month it was on Unleashed, Francis Free and Ann Morris. And they did a lot of studies with Uber and Amazon, different groups that they've come in to help with different issues. And the ratio of positive to negative feedback is 5 to 1 is what it should be. What people do is 1 to 5, but it's like, how do we get into the habits of knowing that, hey, there's going to be performance concerns, but if we can document a few positive items once in a while, like how do we get into that mindset where that is stewardship, right? It's like, hey, I realize that leadership's not about me, it's about you. And instead of finishing that task right now, I'm going to write down what went well this week. How are you finding people are changing that mindset into leadership from management?
Well, we talked about these 4 leadership necessities, conviction and competence and character and covenant. This is one of those one of those competence pieces for a manager that turns them into a leader. They need to recognize what you're talking about, the documentation of the positives and that 5 to 1 ratio. I heard recently even, some studies are saying it's got to be a 6 to 1. Stephen Covey, who wrote the book on trust. I'm drawing a blank on the name right now, but he talks about a trust tax and how these taxes come out. In some respects, your managers have to realize part of my competence as a leader will be measured by how positive am I about the positive things. And, Trevor, when I first ran into some of these numbers, I'm thinking, so I got to go down to the shop floor and say, hey, nice shoes. I like the way you laced up your shoes today. You're not going to trip over them. And did you get a new haircut? And no, these have got to be genuine positives. It means that a manager's got to change their eyesight a bit, and they've got to be finding the wins along the way. It comes back to that whole engineering thing. Is the cup half full or is the cup half empty? Well, I think part of a leadership tenet is really an eternal optimism, right? Where this is hard, but it's not, we can't do it. It's, we can't do it right now, but we're going to figure out a way to do it, right? And that's, again, we've talked about this framework, the 4 leadership necessities. This isn't a model that I'm trying to put on. This is me looking at good managers who are leading well. And that conviction piece of, I see the good in the midst. Man, the companies that survived in the last 3 years, many of them, the reason they survived is because they had a leader saying, yeah, I don't know what we're going to do tomorrow, but here's what we're going to do today. And if we need to change tomorrow, we'll change tomorrow. And they kept their teams moving forward. I think, I called it confident uncertainty. And that's what a manager needs to demonstrate if they're going to be a good leader for their team.
So when we talk competence, we're not talking technical because that's often in manufacturing how we get promoted. There's a lot of engineering minds and a lot of drivers. It's like this secret. The competence is around what's your skill or discipline to be able to say, it's more important for me to build my skill to recognize when I see something good. The common feedback I get is, you just want me to make something up. And just like what you were saying about the haircut. However, I go back to mindset. Like mindset of this person can do it. And then mindset that everything this person does is just not, oh, well, that's just their job. Like everything is your job. Well, everything can't be just your job. And if we don't have those clear expectations of what good looks like, and that, so how do I know to keep doing more of that? Instead, my mindset's just like, oh, just don't do this, don't do this. Well, what if we were so focused on what we're supposed to do that we don't have time to worry about the stuff we're not supposed to do?
Well, and you're exactly right. Leadership competence, the technical skills of doing the job are table stakes. That's what got you there. The reason you got promoted is because you were good at something. The reason you were brought in is because you had a certain level of expertise. But that's just table stakes. The leadership competence you and I are talking about is that ability to have that bigger view, to recognize it is not about me. It's about the team owning our production goals. And in fact, me celebrating that I'm not the one that has to remind them what their production goals are. One of our, we own a number of small businesses, they're all under an umbrella. One of our small businesses, we've got some very young managers there, and we're trying to figure out how do we scale to the next level. And my COO and I implemented what we thought was kind of a good strategic plan. One of our managers called my COO 2 weeks ago and said, hey, Karen, we got a different idea. Here's what we're thinking of doing. And we think it would work this way. And we've talked to the team and it would work well. And at first, as my COO and I were debriefing, it was like, who do you think you are? And then all of a sudden, you know what? That's a good idea. And it's a good idea for 2 reasons. One, you've got your feet on the ground. You see things better. And 2, we challenge you to take an ownership mentality. And all of a sudden, you're taking an ownership mentality. Andy, don't squelch that. Even if they only got it 80% right, celebrate that 80% and then tweak it with them because they're doing what we've asked them to do. They just don't quite have the experience that the senior management does yet. Once again, Trevor, I don't have this stuff dialed down perfectly, and it's not me saying this is what we should do. This is me saying when I look at good leaders, this is what they do. And that whole area of conviction and competence, creating vision and passion and strategy, thinking 3 months, 6 months, a year out, and then giving people the right to own things and to make mistakes. You and I both heard the term, fail fast and fix. Let them do that a little bit. That's leadership. You're moving from being just a manager to becoming a real leader at that point.
And I like the fact, if you go back to the character, I think, you and I both have good character where we interact together well, but those behaviors don't always represent our character. So your behavior could have been, we already got a plan in place, we're not going to do that. And then even though your character is still good, if your behavior doesn't represent what your character is, because when I look back at some of the reviews, 360 reviews I've gotten or employee opinion surveys, it's kind of like, oh, okay. So how they're seeing my character is not always showing up like that. So it's those micro moments of saying, hey, how do I keep myself grounded to, am I slipping into my ego in the management phase of, hey, I own this idea? Or is it, oh yeah, it's not about me. And actually, if it's their idea and I don't think it's as good, it probably still is better.
Or at least let them try it and then they'll learn. So yeah, one of the core values we have in our business is extend grace to the teachable, which means people are allowed to make mistakes. The flip side of that, what that means for you and me as managers is we've got to build some margin in that allows them to fail and to celebrate. A colleague years ago who was heading up a graphic design department for a light manufacturing firm. So they were the one that was putting the pizzazz on the product. And she had a designer who totally messed things up. And it was $1 million account, Trevor. This was for a small business. This was a huge account. They lost the account because this designer, and the designer came into her office knowing that he was going to be fired. And she said, why would I fire you? You just learned $1 million mistake. We need you back down in the design shop. And I thought, man, first of all, that's big of her.
Yes.
My business is too small to lose $1 million client. But that's, if we're going to extend grace to the teachable, what that means to us as managers who are aspiring to be leaders is we have to accept the stewardship of their performance. And that's a challenge in 2022 when supply chains are constrained and staffing issues are barking up the tree for all of us. It's tough.
That is courage of leadership. Those are difficult decisions because, especially in I find bigger corporate settings, because there's sometimes we're rewarded as saying, oh, Dr. Andy has a lot of character because he's not afraid to let people go. But it takes more courage you can't just let it slide. You need to have that really uncomfortable conversation of, man, this was $1 million. This is almost going to break us. So now we really need you. We need you more than ever, because now this is super important and you're going to be able to teach others on, how do we avoid this situation? And now you're going to know how to get there. So we look at these 4 leadership necessities: conviction, competence, character, covenant, which I love. And this goes by way too fast, but Andy, as our listeners are wrapping up here and we're thinking management versus leadership, what's the one message you want them to walk into the plant today thinking about?
That's $1 million question. You and I need to have some more time together on that. I've been looking at those type of people for more than 25 years now. And I don't think I've got it dialed down perfectly, but over the long haul, Trevor, I think I can stand pretty firmly on the reality that you will never be a better leader than you are a person. Leadership development begins with self-development. And so look inward first. I mean, there's a lot more that can be said about that, but the personal side of leading well, at the end of the day, at the end of the month, at the end of the quarter, at the end of the year, have you made your people better people, not just have you met your production goals? I would say that's going to be the measure of your leadership legacy. You'll never be a better leader than you are a person.
And people wonder why I named this podcast years ago Mindfulness Manufacturing, because it takes that level of time and effort into, we're not two different people working at home. And if we don't start with ourselves, we don't get better. Dr. Andy, how do our listeners, other than your newsletter, which I'm subscribed to, and I've seen some of your videos, which has been helpful as well, how do they follow you? How do they find out about your book?
Well, a couple of things, Trevor. First of all, thank you for the honor of being on with your listeners. You and I both have real respect for leaders that are on the manufacturing floor and at the plants. This is frontline leadership. I'm privileged to talk to them. One of the things that's real apparent is, a lot of leadership is accomplished through the communication of leaders. And I've got a resource available to them. If they simply go to leadershipmaterials.com, it'll take them to an ebook, 3 imperative leadership conversations, how to hold those hard conversations that you and I talked about.
Yes.
The coaching conversation that you've alluded to, we probably need another session together to talk about what you and I believe around coaching. And then how to have those affirmation conversations and not make them, oh, nice laces on your shoe today, what I call the 3-fold affirmation conversation. So if they go to leadershipmaterials.com, leadershipmaterials.com, fill out that form. They'll get a copy of that 8-page ebook with some resources, and they'll also then be on my blog mailing list. As you know, I put out a blog every month on topics that you and I are both pretty passionate about. The other thing is just Andy@NeillieLeadership.com if they want to shoot me a quick email. So Trevor, thanks for the privilege of talking to your folks. You and I both know, while we might read in the Wall Street Journal about the Fortune 500 companies doing billion-dollar M&A work, our economy gets pushed forward by people leading frontline teams, getting stuff done.
Boots on the ground, be a good person, have some fun. Thanks so much, Dr. Andy. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Hey folks, appreciate you taking the time to join us today. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone. Haven't subscribed yet? Do it now. Remember, if you want results, the key is increasing your awareness of how you show up.